Hi everyone, it's Bob Butera with Lesson 12 in the Meditation for Your Type course. And we're finishing the conceptual meditation section. And today we're going to talk about egolessness, surrendering the ego, being selfless, as a concept on which you can meditate. Humility, of course, is the other way of saying that. We're going to start with a relaxation exercise where you attempt to connect to the larger universe. And this is an exercise where you focus on your breathing. As you relax your body, you consider the idea that you are in fact the universe. You're not necessarily Bob or Joe or Sue in your physical body only, that as you breathe, the breath connects you to the larger universe. This is a way of seeing the lower self, which would be thinking of our body and our personal life, and connecting it with a higher self, which as soon as we breathe in, we are immediately connected to the larger universe. So that concept can be really key, since in our societies, as developed as we are, we become very human being centric, anthrocentric, where all we do is think about our life, our family, our job, and we're not really in our general culture or in our society, we're not thinking often about the larger universe, that we're a part of nature. If we were living in a teepee on a flat and changing location every so often, and we were a group, a small tribe, we would be seeing nature around us all the time. There wouldn't be as many people, and that type of consciousness would be more natural to us. Since it's not the way we are, we have to try to balance ourselves, and this is one way at going after that egolessness. So taking the relaxation along those lines. For a breathing exercise, I want to focus on what we call the smooth breath, which is taking a normal breath in and out, using the three-part breathing like we've gone over a bunch of times, and noticing the beginning and end, if you will, the changeover from exhalation to inhalation. Now, watch my physical movement. As I breathe in, you can see, if I step forward a little bit, you see my chest go up. Now when I reach the apex, if I go that first beginning of the exhalation, there'll be like a slamming down, so to speak, or a much more intense exhalation at the very beginning, and then it'll taper off into probably a smooth kind of continuous exhalation until I get to the end where I go and I breathe in somewhat quickly the first second or two, and then that tapers off until the end of my inhalation. On those two ends are moments where a lot of thoughts come into play. Again, it makes you feel very human, if you will, because you're like very body-centric. By smoothing out those corners, you reduce the amount of errant thoughts that you'll have, because there's a tremendous nervous system change at the end of the exhalation or inhalation, because the body is, of course, saying, I'm expelling the air now, I'm releasing the CO2, and then, of course, when you start to inhale, I'm receiving. So there's a changeover in the system, and at that moment, our brain has a lot of extra stimulus, and we often have a lot of thoughts. The goal will be to make the changeover seamless, so that you're very conscious of breathing the same rate, if you will, all throughout the breath, and then slowly stopping and breathing in again. So you would be more like this. Hand moves across, it stops, it comes back. Very smooth with your breath. So I spent a little extra time on that, but that's a really important point. Now, as far as focusing on egolessness, and humility. This is going to be a very subtle discussion, but that you'll take up in class. And I guess I'm somewhat at an odd for words on this topic, but essentially you're going to notice that every time you have a thought, it's coming out of the ego. And it's paradoxical when you talk about egolessness, because we must have an ego to be egoless, if you get it. You know, you have to be alive, and you have to have an identity, and you have to have an ego. At the same time, you want to hold that ego lightly. So in the ancient spiritual literature, they would talk about dying to this ego, or causing the death of the ego. And of course, that structure, psychological structure, worked very well in the ancient times. It is more apparent in the modern day that it seems, in my experience, to work best when you embrace your ego, and that maintains a very limited ego. And again, that's in part because of how our culture is structured, and that we're so individualistic, especially in Western countries. So if you try to annihilate that, it'll almost cause more inner strife than if you say, hey, I have to have an identity, I have to have a social security number, I have to have a name and a family, but that doesn't have to be the overwhelming part of who I am. I can be, again, connected to something larger than myself, and that can be my real identity. Meanwhile, I have an ego that has a name and it has a history. So we don't necessarily, in a sense, annihilate the ego, especially for people who live in the world. We embrace it. Of course, the ego is a small part of that embrace. So in class, you'll get into more of the subtle details on the ego, and you can read up on the exercise. I wanted to emphasize the relaxation and the breathing exercise today in this video, and have you go further in this egoless discussion when you read the essay and in class. So have a great week for this, and there's some other news in the email that we'll be having a summer course, and we'll leave the details for the email on that. So have a great week. Take care.